I did make a big mistake though, Mike.
What's that?
I decided that based off of GTD, I was going to consolidate a bunch of inboxes into my email. That was fun.
How'd that
So
turn
I,
out?
well, I end up with about 300 emails in a day currently, and it's fun. You have to set aside at least an hour to get through it all, but that means that I'm not checking Twitter. I'm not checking a bunch of this other stuff repeatedly throughout the day. So it ends up as a good thing.
Nice.
Any massive changes to your GTD system after rereading the book last time?
Not any major changes, but what reading the book did for me is it made me realize that I had fallen off the wagon to a certain degree. So I've been trying to do a much better job of making sure that everything, absolutely everything, gets captured. And then I'm a little bit more consistent and thorough with my reviews. So I'd say in the last couple of weeks, those have been taken up a notch, but I definitely still have some room for improvement.
Yeah, that sounds. I had to do a big like brain dump. I guess the mind sweep process. I had to do a bunch of that, and one of the interesting pieces I had to incorporate was making sure I did that on a regular basis, just because it was like you're saying, it's too easy to just get on the train of collect things as they come, and then you're putting it into the system and running with it from there. But then you always have to make sure you take a step back and it's like, okay, what's on my mind that I'm not getting out of my mind right now, and what do I do about it? That was kind of my difficulty and the thing I wasn't doing. So that would be, I don't know, that's been a big step for me, is to try to get that back on track.
Yep, as they say in the movie Zoolander, what do we do when we fall off the horse? We get back on.
And it, to me, the book that we go through, that we just finished reading, that we're going to go through today, I thought this was a good next step after getting things done, because getting things done for me was a lot about remembering the things I need to do, freeing up that mental RAM, and accomplishing things. And today's book, The Willpower Instinct by Kelly McGonigal, it kind of helps me go to that next step and focus on, okay, how do I have the self control to do the things that are on those lists? If that makes sense. So, like, how do I actually make sure that I'm doing the stuff that I've set aside from the getting things done system? It's kind of, I've been calling it TWP. How do I actually accomplish that and make sure I'm on task? Does that make sense? Does that, I don't know. They were interestingly connected to me.
They definitely the willpower instinct to me. I saw immediate gains when I read this, and part of it was the application of actually following through and doing my reviews and making sure that I'm capturing everything the way that I'm supposed to, like we talked about when we did getting things done. Because I don't know, reading this book was kind of like a little bit of a pep rally. It's like a, yeah, you can do it sort of a thing. And you get done reading a chapter and you're like, oh, this isn't that hard. Like, I understand how this works now. I can put this into action in my own life.
Yeah, it's one of those things I really wanted. I wanted each chapter to be consolidated down into like a paragraph, so that I could just read one of those every day. Because every time I put the book down, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go take on the world now, because I feel like I could accomplish a whole lot. But before we get too far here, so The Willpower Instinct, it's by Kelly McGonigal. The byline on this: how self-control works, why it matters, and what you can do to get more of it. And to be honest, Mike, whenever I picked up the book, so I ordered it from Amazon, the classy thing to do, and I didn't really know I didn't even know what that byline was until it showed up at the door. So I picked it up. I was reading the back of it, and I realized that I had not listened, but I had watched, Kelly McGonigal has done a TED Talk, and it's about stress, which she doesn't talk about a whole lot here in The Willpower Instinct, but she does have a lot of research that she's done on stress, and I think that's kind of her correlation of stress kind of combats willpower or self-control. And she's really good about explaining how do you deal with that. And this, I think, was one of her first steps. Like, it's the step before you get into the stress side of things. And to be honest, reading the introduction of this made me want to be done with it right away. Not because I understood everything she was going to go through, but I wanted the tips and tricks, like, already figured out. It's like, okay, how many of these things am I failing at? And how many things am I thinking that I'm really good at and I'm good at accomplishing and I'm good at, I guess, controlling my mind to focus on the right thing, and yet I'm not reaching that.
I kind of had the same thing when I read this book. Right away when I dove in, she gives you some quick wins. So from a marketing perspective, she did a great job. Because in the first chapter, she's, you can do this and you can do that and you can do this to increase willpower. And then she gets into really the why behind willpower and how self-control works and stuff like that further on in the book. But one of the things that she highlighted right at the beginning, which I thought was really interesting, was that the average person thinks that they make about 14 food-related decisions a day, when in reality, it was like 227.
I know. I ended up, so I do this whole book index thing on the back, and there's so many of those, Mike. I had this little fun tidbits thing that I was highlighting and marking up tons of those things, and there was so many of them. Like, how many things do we, like, for example, one of them was that dieting tends to help most people increase weight. You end up gaining weight from most diets. It's like, what?
Yeah, and the way that she explains it, it's kind of like, well, yeah, I can totally see why that would happen. Who in their right mind would try to just embark on this diet? But a lot of people do because they don't understand the process. So that was really helpful for me, understanding the process and really understanding the 3 different types of willpower. She defined them as I will, I won't, and I want. And if you do the book the way you're supposed to, and I didn't do it this way, you probably didn't either because of the time frame that we read it, but she teaches this stuff as a class at Stanford. So it's broken down into you choose your willpower challenge at the beginning, and then you go through it as like a series of 10 different lessons. And so she talks about how your willpower challenge at the beginning, if it falls into one of these categories, it's not going to be as effective, but she doesn't tell you that till you get to like chapter 4 or 5. So she kind of reveals stuff as she goes, but it was really interesting to see why some things will work if we view it through I will versus I won't, and vice versa. And I think that is really the trick for a lot of people who struggle with this stuff is, they want to go to the gym consistently, but it's just in the way that they're framing that, just looking at it from a different angle or a different perspective, the exact same thing, that might be enough to help you follow through and actually take action on that.
Right. And there was a lot of tips that she goes through on each of those. And the one piece of this whole thing that stood out to me was that your brain actually can, because she does a ton of the studies, whereas last time we were talking about getting things done in that chapter on science and how it was rather lacking. I didn't dig into the studies on this one near as much as I did on that one, simply because the first 2 that I looked at, they're rock solid. And Kelly's really good about finding the really well done studies, I guess. So she has, every chapter is basically about that. She pulls together 2 or 3, sometimes 5 studies, and then explains how they apply to your life. And one of those was how you can physically grow a certain part of your brain, which was fascinating to me because I've never really thought about, like, the example I think she gave was about memory. If you remember those card games where you had the cards laying face down and you had to flip one up and try to match the 2 of them? And you had to memorize where everything was at so that you could make those matches. And she simply said that if you do that for about 10, 15 minutes every day, you play that game every single day, the part of your brain that helps you work on memory physically does grow and get bigger and gets better. And the connections are strengthened in your brain physically. And even simple things like self-control, or, in that case, memory, you can physically work on those and make them bigger and make your brain better at those. And that kind of blew my mind a little bit. It's like, okay, so that means if I find ways to practice self-control, which she gives probably hundreds of tips on how to do that in here.
Mm-hmm.
If you can find ways to do that work for you, then you can actually grow your brain in the self-control muscle. She literally makes that correlation of you can treat your brain like a physical muscle. And we've heard that in the past. Like you hear people talk about your brain as a muscle, but I've never thought about it as actually physically growing whenever you do that.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that she mentions that you can do is meditation. But the way that she framed that section I thought was really interesting because she's used examples of people who thought that they were terrible at meditation, which I would fall into that category.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've tried it in the past and not been great at it, but I just kind of assumed that it wasn't for me, that I was doing something wrong. And so I kind of cut out the practice of that. But she basically says that it's okay if you suck at it. The fact that you're doing it, even if you can't pay attention or you can't do it the way that you think you're supposed to do it, you catch your mind drifting and things like that, that's okay because the effectiveness of it isn't coming from you being able to focus on those things. It's just putting in those reps with your brain. And some of the things that she said meditation improves are like attention, focus, stress management, impulse control, self-awareness. So one of the things, kind of going out of order, sorry, but one of the things that I'm trying to do here is I have this app on my iPhone. It's called Meditation Studio. And okay. I'm trying to get back into it. It's got a whole bunch of guided meditations, which range anywhere from like 2 minutes to, I think there's some like as long as 20 minutes. And I'm going to try and start doing these consistently. And I'm hoping that I'm going to see the results that she says I'm going to see. And I believe I will, because like you said, this whole thing has so much research behind it. It can be overwhelming, but kind of like you, when she would refer to a study, I recognize some of the names, like she mentions Ray Baumeister and stuff like that. But she does it often enough that when she does it, you're just like, yep, okay, you know what you're talking about. Let's get to the the results. Like one of the things she mentioned at the beginning was that there's a study where people who are distracted are much more likely to give in to temptation. So the study itself was with students who are trying to remember a phone number. Do you remember this one?
Vaguely.
Okay.
Go on and it'll trigger.
Yeah. So students who are trying to remember a phone number were 50% more likely to not have the willpower to choose fruit at the snack cart and give in and get chocolate cake instead.
Yep.
Just because they're trying to remember a phone number, which going back to like the food related decisions that people make, like actually being 227 instead of the 14 that they think. That was a big thing for me, was recognizing, and I kind of knew this already, but it really reinforced it and made me aware of it again, that I make a lot of decisions throughout the day that I maybe shouldn't be making, and it's depleting my willpower. So how can I make sure that I conserve enough willpower for the things that really matter by pushing off or doing them earlier or whatever, like the other things that don't really matter, like what am I going to eat today? Not that that doesn't matter, but you get what I'm saying. Like, for example, you have to choose what you're going to wear in the morning. Well, you could do that the night before when you're getting ready for bed. That's an easy win then, and you don't have to make that decision when you first get up, as an example.
Yeah, and I think that correlates to, you hear of people like Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, who they wear the same thing every single day. Like they just have this wardrobe that they always wear. I think there's some of that here with that decision fatigue process that we hear about. And that's that, and the concept there is that you limit the number of decisions you need to make on some of the mundane things so that you can focus your mind on making the decisions on the more important or the bigger ideas. And I think this is partially why, because you need to push off some of those willpower draining functions that when you're working your self-control, like you're trying to do too much with it. Because the more that you work that muscle, it's just like, any part of your, like if you're working your legs or your arms, if you're doing bench presses, you're eventually going to wear out. Well, it's the same thing with self-control. Is you're working that muscle, and over time it does get tired and you can't keep going. I think about whenever we have our structures and our systems in place, the more that we try to say that we're gonna get so much done today, or as she's talking about, I'm gonna get a ton of things done tomorrow. It's always the elusive tomorrow person who's gonna do it.
Mm-hmm.
The more I can give to them, the more I'm pushing myself to do that, the less I'm able to accomplish today. And we tend to associate the things that the bigger, grander things that we want to do. Like, I'm going to accomplish 10 new podcasts today. Well, no, you're not. There's not even enough time to do that. You're not going to have the mental energy. You're not going to have the focus to do that. And if you think that you're going to do that tomorrow, you're really not, because you're going to feel the same way tomorrow. And then it's the next day. And this is where the procrastination circle kicks in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that part was really interesting. She basically said that we have a psychological tendency to predict the ideal scenario for the future, but in reality, that ideal scenario never really materializes exactly like that. And even though people knew that, they were more likely to commit more time or more resources to something in the future because they still believed it at a psychological level that they would be able to better handle their time in the future. For example, like if you were going to commit to a service project, you'd give X amount of time right now, maybe it's 15 minutes, but 2 weeks in the future, you'd be willing to give 30 minutes. And then she was digging into like, why is that people think that in the future, they're going to be better stewards of everything. I thought that was really interesting because she also talks about how the further we go into the future, the more we kind of double down on that effect, even though it can be proven that that's not what usually happens.
Right. Right.
If you were to actually measure 2 weeks from now, how much time do you want to commit to this thing? It's actually less than the 15 minutes you have today. But even though you're armed with that data and you see the patterns playing out in your own life, it's like you feel that you can beat that, even though that's ingrained in there. Like you have enough, I don't know, it's not even really willpower. It's just like, I am going to overcome the laws of nature and I'm going to do this differently, but it's just not being realistic with ourselves. So recognizing that kind of stuff happens was really good for me, because I definitely see how I overcommit to stuff a lot of times, because I'm like, oh yeah, I'll have an hour where I can squeeze in, next week to do this thing. And then my kid has to go into the ER to get stitches, or fill in the blank. It's always something, but you would think that, you learn from that stuff and you start to see the pattern, but we don't. We just always project the ideal, even though that's never what actually happens.
Exactly. And I think this is kind of the moral licensing piece that she was talking about. This is easily the one that I struggle with the most, I think, because I'm really good at saying that if I work really hard on something today, or say this morning, so this morning I'm doing a ton of reviews and I'm doing a lot of writing and I'm accomplishing a lot. Well, then I go to lunch and I come back from lunch, and because I feel like I had a highly productive morning, it's kind of like giving me permission to do the easy goof off type of tasks in the afternoon, or none at all. And that's what she's referring to with moral licensing. If I do good now, I can do bad later. And she correlates that again. She uses the example of food and smoking and drinking quite a bit. And I think that's partially because in her class, that's usually the self-control and the willpower challenges that people take on, is those type of those difficulties that people deal with. And for me, it's usually a productivity challenge of, if I do a lot of good things this morning, or I have a good morning, it kind of licenses me to goof off on YouTube in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And she even takes that the step further, where if I have time tomorrow to accomplish something that I don't want to do today, or I just think I can do tomorrow, I'm gonna be able to write 100 pages tomorrow. Absolutely no way is that going to happen. But say I'm going to write 100 pages tomorrow. Well, that means that I can skip the 20 that I'm going to write today. So just because I know that I have that time tomorrow, well, then when tomorrow comes, of course, I don't have the strength to do that because I haven't been working myself hard enough to build up the endurance and the strength to do that. So I'm not going to write the 100 tomorrow. I might get 30, but it's like, okay, I'll do 120 tomorrow. Well, you see how this goes. You end up just continually building this whole licensing process of, is if I have time in the future and I don't want to do it now, well, that gives me permission to skip it now. And now we're back down that procrastination path.
Yep. And this is in line with the big thing that I liked about this book was understanding how this stuff all works. So she explains in that section of the book that there's really two different selves who are at constant odds. There's the self that wants to sit down and write, in your example, because that they know that that's what's going to help them achieve their long-term goals. It's going to make them productive. It's going to provide all these benefits. But then there's the other self, which just wants to veg out and watch TV or not be productive in any way, shape, or form. So recognizing that those two things are always battling against each other is important because, just like you said, the moral licensing, we take one step forward and then we feel like, okay, we can now take 2 steps back. And that's why the dieting stuff doesn't work. Because you're like, oh, well, I ate well for this one meal. So for lunch, maybe I had a salad. So for dinner, I'm going to make up for it, quote unquote, by getting the biggest steak I can and having chocolate cake for dessert. And you completely undo all of the forward progress that you made previously. And this concept, she called it goal liberation, I believe. So it's basically, we've been working on this one thing. And so that progress that we made can actually cause us to abandon our goal by granting permission for the other self to have their way. And usually it comes back in multiples where you take, like I said, 1 step forward and then you end up taking 2 steps back when you let that happen. So the cool takeaway I got from that was that you can always push through. Just like she used the analogy of like runners, they will hit a wall, and if you're a really good runner, she talks about how that wall is going to come, but that's not the actual wall. That you can push through that just by recognizing that your body is telling you this. Your body is telling you these signals. It's telling you this message, but it's not true. And recognizing it, being able to push through that, the same thing can be done with willpower. Because I know in the past, like I've encountered that where it's like, oh, I can't deal with this anymore. Yes, you can deal with it. You need to recognize that you feel like you've come to the end of yourself, but there's actually a glass ceiling there that you can break through, and you do have more in the tank. And I've seen already a couple times where I've recognized that and be like, oh no, you got this. You push through and you tackle that thing. But I see that paying huge dividends in my own life.
Yeah, I was looking it up because she talks about how fatigue really shouldn't be considered a physical event, but she refers to it as an emotion or a sensation.
Right.
I thought that caught me off guard a little bit because I've always thought of fatigue because I'm a runner from time to time, more of a fair weather runner. And whenever I do that, I tend to sense that fatigue point. And like you're saying, you can break through that, but I never really thought about that fatigue isn't necessarily a real physical thing. Essentially what's going on is that your mind is projecting forward and saying, okay, if you keep up this pace, we're eventually going to wear out. But the thing is that your brain wants to get to that point way before your body actually will give out. So you end up getting that sensation, that emotion of fatigue well before your body actually will give up. And she's saying that self-control is the same. We get this sense that we just can't keep going. We can't keep resisting. We can't keep on task because we're going to wear out, but you actually can. I think the example she gave was if you're resisting a chocolate bar and if you are about ready to give in. You've used up all of your self-control to prevent yourself from eating that chocolate bar. And then she steps in and says, for $100, I'll give you $100 if you don't eat that. Well, all of a
Right.
sudden, you've got a lot more self-control all of a sudden. Like, it just immediately shows up at that point. And it's just that process of, you can dig deep. You can find that extra self-control if you're willing to search for it, and you're willing to just realize that, yeah, I'm getting tired of this and I just can't keep going. But yes, you can.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. And there was another thing that I thought was really interesting, kind of in that same vein, is the what the heck effect.
Yeah.
Where if you don't follow through with stuff, if you give in, that indulgence will lead to regret or guilt, whatever you want to label it. And that's actually going to lead you to greater indulgence. So it's like once you slip up and once you fall off the path even a little bit, you're at a very precarious point, because you could very easily continue to fall down that hill if you don't catch what's going on. And I can totally see myself doing that, especially with food. I don't know why, but when I don't eat well, the tendency, and she says this in the book, is to just keep eating. And it's like, if you sit down and think about it, like, why am I eating this? I had a whole pizza, I had a ham sandwich, like a bag of potato chips. Why am I eating this apple pie? But it's like a vicious shame spiral, and you can't get out of it. It's like, oh, well, the day's gone anyways. Like I'm so far gone now, I may as well just keep going.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Now, did you get, I think that's kind of like the dopamine piece that she got into. Maybe it's just me, Mike, but I've always thought of dopamine as the actual reward in your brain. So you go pick up that chocolate bar, and as soon as you eat it, you eat that slice of apple pie, and then that's what gives you that dopamine shot in your mind. And that's the way I've always thought of it. And she completely contradicted that
Right.
in the book. And maybe that's just my misperception in the past. But essentially what she was getting at with the dopamine piece was that is, it's not the reward itself, it's the expectation of a reward. So it's that desire for something. So your mind is given that dopamine whenever you're expecting the apple pie. So it makes you want it. And it's that process of, I want it, and it will continue to pound at you until you give in. But once you give in, that wanting piece is gone. It stops pushing that desire. So once you give into it, it's past that. And then your brain is no longer excited about it. And it's like, okay, well, why did I just do that? I don't know. It doesn't feel near like what I thought it was going to. So you end up with that expectation of something that's going to bring you that joy or that reward, and then it just completely falls short.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting where she talked about the different brain chemicals, and I don't know exactly what any of these do, but dopamine is the thing that people get addicted on, but it always leaves them wanting more. So what did she say? She says the dopamine hit promises us that we're going to feel better, but it always lets us down. And so dopamine, I believe, is the pleasure chemical in the brain, but that's different than like serotonin or oxytocin, where like dopamine is almost like a artificial substitute. Like serotonin, I believe, and again, I'm going to probably mess up the science here, but serotonin, I believe, is more like the happiness chemical. So you could say pleasure, happiness, they're kind of related, but pleasure is just like what feels good right now, whereas I view happiness as more long-term good. And so she talks about like effective stress relievers are not the ones that release the dopamine. Those are the ones like the rats in the story that got addicted to the thing that was actually hurting them.
Right.
But it's not the way that you feel when you do these stress relievers. It's more so the long-term results. And that can be a little bit tricky because we can't sometimes see the long-term results, but you can kind of tell, like the rats in the story were always looking for that next dopamine hit. It's like the Pavlovian dog response. Whereas the serotonin just translates into better mental well-being, better mental adjustment, like a generally feeling more happy, more satisfied. Like, I think if you were to actually sit down and say, how am I really feeling right now, you would be able to articulate the difference between, my dopamine is wearing off and I got to figure out where the next one's coming from. And yeah, I'm feeling very satisfied right now. You know what? No matter what happens, I'm good. So that was a really big thing for me. And then,
she did correlate that with technology today, which I was really glad she did that, because I kept wondering as she was going through this potential for reward delivery mechanism. I really feel like so much of the apps out there are really designed to do that specific thing, where you're expecting, it gives you that expectation of a notification or someone liked it. I mean, how many teens get addicted to seeing how many likes are on their Instagram photos? I mean, you see all these different addictions that come from that. And it's not so much that the actual like on, say, take that example, a like on Instagram, the like itself isn't the thing that's giving you the pleasure. It's the expectation that there might be one that's giving you that. And whenever these apps are built to play off of that, they really become that addiction. It literally is an addiction to expecting something different. You become that rat who has the dopamine trigger right in your pocket all the time to try to give you that desire all the time. And you just can't put it down at that point. And you really have to break that cycle of just realizing, and this is the part that I really enjoyed about this book, Mike, is that she doesn't just give you these studies and give you the issues. She actually does give you the tips and tricks on how to overcome them and how to break the cycles and the difficulties that come with this.
Yeah.
And in that particular case, it's just a noticing idea, the mindfulness, like you're saying, the meditation and the mindfulness process of how do I focus, or in this case, how do I just realize that I'm not focusing?
Mm-hmm.
And just realizing that take the phone example, with that, I have to realize that, yes, I'm expecting something new. And because I'm expecting something new, when it does come, when that like does happen, how do I feel at that point? Like, you start to notice how you feel about it and slowing it down and saying, okay, well, now that it came through, now that reward is here, what's my expectation? What comes next? Am I just looking for the next one? Am I hoping for the next one? If that's all there is, then what is the point of this circle?
Right.
And why am I doing this? Is there something bigger that I'm supposed to be looking forward to? Because something that small and mundane really doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that one kind of falls squarely in the domain of the I want willpower. But another similar strategy that she talks about at the end regarding the I won't willpower is to surf the urge, she calls it, which I thought was a really cool strategy, where you're being tempted to do something that you've declared, I don't want to do this thing anymore. And so the process that she outlines is to recognize that the temptation is there and accept the thought or the feeling that it's generating without arguing with it, which is completely counterintuitive to just about everybody that I've heard prior to this teaching on this stuff.
Yep.
She uses the example of don't think about white polar bears, and then that's the only thing you can think on.
I was telling my wife about that, and she was like, I don't ever want to think about white bears ever again.
Right. It's totally true, though. I've heard it said in golf, the illustration of this principle would be you have to focus on where you want to hit the ball as opposed to where you don't want to hit the ball. So if you're thinking, don't hit it in the water, don't hit it in the water, your brain can't discern do or don't. And so it's focusing on the water. So most of the time, in that case, your ball will go into the water if that's your focal point. So I really liked that strategy that she presented, because I think that's a much more effective way to battle those things. So number one, recognize the temptation. Number 2, accept the thought or feeling without arguing. Number 3, this is the key part, and the thing that I am going to apply to my own life, is to step back and realize that you can control whether you act on those feelings and act on that temptation. And then 4th, remember your goal. So the why, for example, which is relating to food, because she used that example a lot. When you say, oh, I've been good today, I'm going to go ahead and have that piece of chocolate cake, it's because you've forgotten your why, you've forgotten your goal. If you always have that goal in front of you, it's a lot easier to say no, because you can more clearly see how eating that chocolate cake is not going to help you reach your weight goal or fit into the pair of pants that you want to fit into or whatever. So having that in front of you as much as possible is really key when you're dealing with the I won't brand of willpower.
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons that I'm so bent on doing reviews all the time, because I struggle a lot with making sure that the tasks and the things I'm doing each day are the right ones. We were just talking about that last time on the GTD show, and whenever I sit down to figure out what it is I'm going to do for the day or what projects am I going to do that day, a lot of times I have to look at my goal for the week or the month or the upcoming quarter. I really have to keep those in mind literally every day, Mike, because otherwise I'm just I end up doing the one that looks interesting that day, and like she's getting at, you end up off pace, off track, and you're doing things that you really shouldn't be or have chosen not to do. Then you end up derailing so many of your own intentions at the end of the day that you end up in this place where you're continuing these cycles and you're continuing to put things off, or you're now gaining weight instead of losing weight even though you're on a diet, and you end up feeling terrible about yourself. And that's the beauty here, is there are things that you can do to overcome that. And one of these is the chapters that she goes through, and it's intended that you read one of these chapters and then take a week and try to notice them. Obviously, we didn't do that, but just in the short amount of time that I've spent with this, one of them was how these different challenges, these I will, I won't, or I want challenges, they're contagious. I thought that was really interesting. It gives a lot of credence to the phrase of choose your friends wisely, because so many of the things that we see and do every day, the people that we hang out with, you literally do mirror the things that they're doing. So if take for example, if you're going out to eat, let's go to a restaurant and someone there orders chocolate cake, just because they ordered chocolate cake might lead you to ordering something similar. It may not be as bad as that, but it would be more than you would normally do on your own. And she was showing a lot of these studies that show how, like, obesity and fitness, and whether it's positive or negative, it didn't matter, but it would literally spread like an epidemic where it would just spread out through a network of people just from who they associated with. And the more I thought about that and started to pay attention, it's like, yep, the more times that I see people hang out around other folks that go to the gym, then their friends start to go to the gym. Or if someone starts gaining weight, it seems like their friends tend to do the same. But I had never really thought about it a whole lot. But yeah, it really does have a lot of, and she goes through the science and the details of how that actually works in your brain and how that operates from the chemical standpoint. But I thought it was kind of interesting that you can catch, just like a sickness, if you will, you can catch some of these challenges.
Yeah, she talks about how you can catch willpower weakness, is how she termed it, from other people. But she also mentioned this phenomenon called a goal contagion, which is the same sort of effect, where she said that it's surprisingly easy for you to catch someone else's goals for yourself. That I thought was really powerful and probably explains a lot of stuff that people do, especially in regards to email. You know, you were talking earlier about how you consolidated inboxes and you've got 300 messages you got to get through.
Yeah.
One of the things we talk about in regards to email over at Asian Efficiency all the time is it's somebody else's demands and ideas for how you should spend your time. So every time you go in to your email, I embrace this mindset. It's like a warrior getting ready to go into battle. You're just going to say, no, this is the way things are going to be. I'm not going to let the enemy advance, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people accept other people's goals and they never stop to think about, well, what do I really want to get out of my life? What do I really want my life to be about? What do I really want my family's lives to be about? And that can be really powerful, but it's really scary too to think that you can just absorb somebody else's goals by default if you're not being intentional about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how many of these, because the recurring theme that she has throughout the book is pay attention. And
Yep.
so much of that's hard to do. I mean, you really have to take some time over multiple weeks and months of continually working at things. And obviously, I haven't spent that long with this, but it's just easy to see that there are so many locations in your day and in your life and within your social interactions and relationships that you'll notice these things going on. That was the interesting thing with this, is it just revealed like half the battle is knowing. Just knowing what's going on and starting to notice that little bit can make a huge difference time it's said and done, because you end up noticing when these things happen and then you can start to do something about it. Even in the 2 weeks that I've spent with this book, I've been able to get a lot more done, because obviously for me and likely for you, Mike, so many of the challenges that I deal with are staying on task and accomplishing the things that I want to do. And procrastination is probably one of the most difficult challenges that I deal with. I'm not an overweight person. I'm probably told I need to gain weight more than anything. So that's obviously not something I deal with. And, the exercise thing, I feel like I have under control. So some of the things that she's using as core challenges in the book, they don't really apply to me. But she does bring up the procrastination bit and focus fair amounts. And those are the ones that I feel like I fail at more than anything. And it's just noticing and paying attention to, what are my triggers? Like, why did I do that? Why do I feel like I can put that off? Just being able to put words to it and understand it can really provide a lot of power to overcoming that.
Yeah, she said it this way in the book. She said towards the end, feel what you feel, but don't believe everything that you think.
Yeah.
So it's recognizing that your body, your mind, whatever is telling you one thing, but then knowing enough that that signal could be not true. And what you said, like knowing is a big part of it. Do you remember? I think you're probably old enough, Joe, to remember the G.I. Joe cartoons from back in the day.
Yeah, I'm not that young.
So at the end of the cartoons, they would always have like this little 2-minute thing where, this kid's riding his bike down the sidewalk. He doesn't have his helmet on. And so the G.I. Joe characters would be like, hey, you need to wear a helmet. And then they always end it with, now you know, and knowing is half the battle. So that's what I was thinking of. Like the entire time I was reading this book, it's like, oh yeah, now I know. Now I got to do something with it though.
Yeah. I kept thinking about, because so I'm ADHD, and one of the interesting things that comes with that, the psychologist that I've met with over it has told me time and time again to get into meditation and mindfulness. And with him, I've kind of been, I guess, rejecting that ADHD label and calling it a race car brain more than anything, just because I don't see it as a negative thing. So many people try to fix it and they want to do the medication thing and alter. I get it. Some people need that. It's bad enough that some folks do need that. But for me, it's more of a, like, I have a ton of inputs and I love a fire hose of information. And the more that I can bring in, the more I tend to focus on, and I float from one to the next. And the problem for me is that I float back and forth between topics way too fast. And for me, going through the willpower instinct, it really gave a lot of tools for someone that's easily distracted. It's easy to find the tips and tricks that can help with that, so that you're able to downshift a little bit and pinpoint and stay on task with something. And that's where a lot of her mindfulness pieces and the meditation pieces, noticing, paying attention, those do correlate to some of the treatment methods, quote unquote treatment methods that they give for ADD and how to not be distracted, I guess. It did surprise me how much overlap there is with some of the things that they've been telling me I need to do for that side of things as well. So I did think there was a lot of interesting overlap.
Yeah, definitely. There was a lot of stuff that I felt like I could take this and I could learn from this, but kind of specifically, if you want to go over to the action items now, I guess what I got out of this was to alter my daily routine, because I'm a big believer in that it's not necessarily the goals that you set. I think when a lot of people set goals like I'm going to be able to do this or I'm not going to do that, especially in terms of willpower, they approach it from the typical cascading or waterfall project method or project management method, where it's like, well, this is my cutoff point, and if I don't make it by that point, I'm going over the waterfall.
Yeah.
But what ends up happening is you procrastinate on that. You have that goal for 6 months down the road, and you're like, oh, I got time. I don't need to start running now if I want to run that half marathon in September. So you keep kicking the can down the road. So I didn't want to do that when I read this, even though there were a lot of opportunities I felt where I could say, okay, I'm going to apply this in this way. What I wanted to do is I wanted to make small adjustments to my routine or my rituals, which I would argue is a more effective way to produce the results, is more like the agile approach to this. So like for the next sprint, the next week, 2 weeks, whatever, I'm going to do this thing every day. And the two things for me were to start doing the meditation, like I mentioned earlier, on a daily basis. I really do believe that that's going to pay off big in terms of self-control and willpower. And then the other thing is that I really want to make sure that I am being aware, and I want to make sure that I am journaling the right things every day. I want to make sure that I'm not just going through the motions, and when I get to my journaling prompts, it's just automatic. It's a habit. And what am I feeling right now? I want to actually force myself to pay attention throughout the day and recognize like what is actually happening, so that I can make proper adjustments instead of adjusting to whatever I happen to be feeling at that particular moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it's interesting because your action items are identical to mine. Because knowing that the meditation and mindfulness piece helps in so many ways, and I have to stop and think of that so much of the technology piece might be, and I have zero evidence of this, Mike, but I kind of wonder if the technology piece and the way that we operate with computers in general tends to drive us towards a need to slow down and learn how to develop that self-control and develop the willpower through the mindfulness piece. And that's one that I know for me I need to pick up. So like you, I'm big on the rituals, morning and evening. And that's one of the steps I've been trying to do the last few days, of picking up that meditation piece in the morning. I feel like that's the perfect time because it's quiet in the house and I can count on it. I don't have to worry about being interrupted at that time. And that's the last thing I want to be doing, is sitting there trying to be quiet and focusing on my breath, and there's kids running around in the house. It's just it's not going to work well. So that's the time that I want to do that. The other piece is, like you're saying, the journaling. And I've been doing that for a while. It's pretty easy for me to do that in the evening, to just say, okay, how did the day go? And I've been doing, specifically for that, I've been doing like, what are the 3 positives? What are the 3 growth areas that I need to do today? But one of the things I haven't done, that it seems like Kelly was kind of driving at it in one of the chapters, was compare the things you did that day, the habits or the willpower challenges that you're trying to overcome, compare those to how the day went. So in other words, how am I working towards my goals? And are the things that I did today in line with those, or did I completely detract? Did I completely fail? And do I need to do anything different tomorrow? Because one of the things that she brings up towards the end is just be okay with failure. Like you
Mm-hmm.
need to be okay with having a misfire here and there, because otherwise you're going to be focusing on the negative. And then, like we were talking earlier with the white bears, you end up focusing on the negative, and then it's the only thing you can think about. And then you're continually failing. And then you end up in this binge cycle. What the heck? Let's just do it all. And like you end up in that pit. So trying to compare what I did today to those goals, and then being okay with missing out on those. And then I think the piece that we've been alluding to quite a bit here is just pay attention and just
Mm-hmm.
take the fact that we understand some of the science now. I'm a big why person. So whenever I understand why and how my brain operates, then it makes it a lot easier to just notice those that are going on and do something about it.
Yep, absolutely. And that actually lines up with the other thing that I got out of this book was the delayed discounting. And I think it couples nicely with notice and pay attention, because if you can keep your why in front of you, if you can keep your motivation in front of you, it allows you to overcome that need to, or that want anyways, to go ahead and take action on that thing that just happens to be right in front of you. So this is another thing, and I have to still kind of work out specifically how I'm going to apply this, but I want to become better at recognizing that a delayed reward is going to be better off. And the whole idea behind delay discounting is that the longer you have to wait for that reward, the less it actually means to you. But I want to make sure that I keep my why and my family's why at the forefront, because I know, I do this kind of stuff for a living over at Asian Efficiency. Like, I believe in the effectiveness of rituals. I teach this stuff to people, but keeping that in front of you can make it easy. I'm believing it's going to make it easier to consistently take those small actions that compound and produce the results that you want. So noticing and paying attention, and then recognizing that I'm going to have a bias towards that delayed discounting, and catching myself when that happens and saying, no, the end goal is actually worth it. Just stick with it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end this. There's so many things that she points out and a lot of tips. I do highly recommend picking the book up and reading it, just because it helps you understand how our brains operate. And there's just a lot of little stuff that adds up, I think. And unlike the science chapter in the GTD book, the science here is very well done.
Yeah,
So,
it's awesome. This is, from a literary standpoint, it's very, very different than the GTD book, where GTD was a lot of quotes, which I love quotes. And those quotes, they tend to strike a chord with you, and you're like, yeah, that's exactly it. But a lot of those quotes, David Allen wasn't writing. He was taking them from other people. Whereas I don't think I wrote down a single quote from this book, but I wrote down a whole bunch of ideas and principles. So it's very, very different in that regard. And pretty much every page, every other page, she's referring to some scientific study.
yeah, and I agree with you on the literary standpoint. She has a good writing style, in
Yep.
my opinion. She's very easy to read, despite there being a lot of science. There's a lot of difficult scientist names to go in here. And obviously there's a lot of the neuroscience and chemicals and stuff that she's talking about, which I, for one, am pretty good about picking up, but I felt like it's very easy to read. It was very simple.
It's very approachable. You don't have to be a graduate student at Stanford to understand the way that she presents these things.
Yeah, and I think that's partially because, it was designed as a 10-week class. That's the way that this was designed, and she simply took that class and the best learnings that she got from it and turned it into a book. So it was, lay people going to her class time and time again. I don't know how many times she's put it on now, but she does teach this to, everyday people. It's not like it's designed for academics and PhD students. So it's very well done. I really enjoyed it. I would have no issues picking up something from Kelly again in the future. To the point where I think I added one of those to our list, Mike. So, so yeah, yeah. In the end, it's a good read and would highly recommend it.
So out of 5 stars, what do you rate it?
Oh, I suppose I should have thought about that beforehand, huh?
Put you on the spot.
I know, right? So going through it and the pure being able to comprehend how things operate, because there were so many revelation points in this, I would put it at a 5, simply because it was so easily approachable and there were a ton of things that were very applicable specifically to me in everyday life. So I'd put it at a 5.
Nice. I would also put it at a 5. And like you said, I would recommend this to just about anybody. I think no matter where you are in life, you can read the first chapter and you'll be saying, yeah, I can see how that plays out in my own life. So she does a really good job right at the beginning, articulating the problem, gives you some easy wins with some different practices and things that can actually give you immediate gains to willpower. And then the rest of the book lays out a very compelling case for this is actually what's happening here. And here's some better long-term strategies to help you build up that willpower muscle so that you have the self-control in those situations where you actually need it. So 5 out of 5 from me as well.
So the books we have coming up, the next one on the list is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. So that's one we're going to jump into next. We've kind of been alternating who's picking which book. So I'm the one that grabbed The War of Art. Mike, have you thought about the one you want to do after that at all?
Ooh, I have not. I've got several in my stack. Yeah, let me let me get back to you on that one. But
Okay.
I've got a couple ideas, so stay tuned.
But the next one up, we're going to do The War of Art. And whatever Mike decides will be the next one on the list after that. So we're grateful for everybody stepping in to listen to us this time around, and we will catch you next time.